My name is Marin Cole, I'm 27 years old, and I spent an entire summer locked in my family's attic for a crime I didn't commit. I never thought I'd tell this story out loud. For years, I buried it beneath layers of silence, convincing myself that forgetting was the same as healing. But standing here now, staring at the same house that once stole my freedom, I know the truth. Some ghosts can't be buried until you face them. My name is Marin Cole. I'm 27, and when I was 16, my parents locked me in our attic for 3 months. They told everyone it was discipline. I knew better. It was punishment for something I didn't do. I grew up in a small rural town where reputation meant everything. My mother, Ruth, was a churchwoman always dressed in cream blouses and judgment. My father, Leonard, worked as a contractor, a man whose silence was more dangerous than his words. I had a younger sister, Bryn, who was everyone's favorite, pretty, polite, and perfect. I was the opposite, quiet, artistic, the kind of girl who sketched in the margins of her homework and hid her emotions in a journal. To my parents, that made me a disappointment too strange, too emotional, too much like a burden that didn't listen. The summer I turned 16, everything fell apart. I remember the day vividly. It was hot, so hot the air itself felt heavy. My mother came into my room with a look I'd never seen before, one that mixed fury with something close to fear. In her hand was an empty envelope that used to hold the deposit for Bryn's private school tuition. "Where is it?" she demanded. "Where's what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The money, Marin. Don't lie to me. I didn't even know she kept it in the house." I told her that, but it didn't matter. By the time my father came home, her story had solidified. I'd stolen the money to buy art supplies online. I tried to explain, but he didn't want to hear a word. "Upstairs," he said, voice cold. "You'll stay there until you learn respect." At first I thought he meant a day, maybe a week, but the lock clicked behind me, and the sound of the bolt sliding home still echoes in my nightmares. The attic wasn't meant for living. It was hot, dusty, filled with old trunks and broken furniture. Sunlight came through one small window, and at night, rats scurried in the walls. They left me a thin blanket, a cot, and a bucket. That was it. The first few days, I screamed until my throat burned. I begged them to listen, to believe me. My mother would stand by the door and whisper prayers, pretending she couldn't hear my sobs. My father didn't come up at all. Only Bryn visited once, peeking through the door with wide eyes. "You shouldn't have taken it," she whispered. I swore I hadn't. She just shook her head and left. I spent hours counting the cracks in the ceiling, scribbling in an old notebook I found in one of the trunks. Writing was the only thing that kept me sane. I wrote about my parents' anger, my sister's silence, the smell of dust and mold, the way the light through the window shifted as the days passed. By the second month, I stopped crying. Something inside me went cold. I realized no one was coming to save me, not neighbors, not teachers, not friends. My family had erased me. When they finally unlocked the door, I was thinner, quieter, and different in a way that couldn't be seen. They told me to apologize for what I'd done. I remember looking at my mother's smug face and my father's narrowed eyes and whispering, "I didn't take it." He raised his hand, but I didn't flinch. I think that scared him more than tears would have. After that summer, I was never the same. I left home the moment I turned 18 and never looked back. For years, I built a life far away: college, art exhibitions, a quiet apartment. But no matter how far I went, part of me stayed locked in that attic, 16 years old and unheard. I thought time would erase it. I thought success would make it hurt less. But trauma doesn't disappear, it waits. When I got the letter from the county last month saying the Cole property was being foreclosed, something inside me shifted. That house, my prison, was about to be gone forever. And I realized I couldn't let it vanish without confronting the truth, so I came back. As I stood at the end of that long gravel driveway, weeds brushing against my jeans, I could still see the small attic window, the one that used to be my only glimpse of the world. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Older, harder, unrecognizable. The house looked dead, but to me, it pulsed with every memory I'd tried to forget. And as the wind crept through the trees, carrying the faint creak of old wood, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't here to mourn what happened. I was here to uncover it, to make them face what they'd done, whether they were ready or not. I thought I'd buried the past, but the moment I saw that house again, I knew it was time to dig it up. Standing in front of my childhood home felt like staring into a grave I was never supposed to find. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but it still had the same unsettling silence that used to haunt my dreams. The white paint had peeled away, revealing gray planks beneath, and the porch sagged under years of neglect. Ivy had climbed its way up the sides, swallowing the edges of the roof. The windows were dark, except for the attic's its single, narrow pane staring down at me like an unblinking eye. I stood at the gate, clutching the old key I'd found at the bottom of one of my storage boxes. I wasn't even sure why I'd kept it after all these years. Maybe part of me always knew I'd come back. It had been 11 years since I last stood here. 11 years since the day they told me to pack what little I had and go. My parents were gone. Now dead within 2 years of each other, and the house had sat abandoned ever since. Most people would have let it stay that way, but I needed answers. As I stepped through the front door, the smell hit me first: dust, wood, and something faintly metallic, the kind of smell that clings to memories. The floorboards groaned under my feet, the same way they used to when I'd try to sneak downstairs after curfew. Every sound seemed amplified by the emptiness. The kitchen still had the same faded wallpaper with blue flowers, though most of it was peeling now. The sink was rusted, the counters chipped. My mother's old teacups still sat on the shelf, perfectly aligned. She'd been obsessed with order. Even in cruelty, she found a way to make it neat. I walked through each room like a ghost retracing her own footsteps. Every creak felt familiar. Every shadow reminded me of how I used to press my ear against the attic floor, listening to laughter from below. They'd eat dinner, talk about Bryn's grades, her achievements, her charm, like I didn't exist just a few feet above them. I stopped at the base of the attic stairs. The wooden ladder still leaned against the wall, its rungs worn smooth by age. The last time I climbed those steps I was 16 and terrified. My father had locked me up there after a single accusation that I'd stolen money from Bryn's private school fund. I hadn't. I'd screamed it over and over, but no one listened. Not my father, whose eyes hardened like stone. Not my mother, who said, "Confession brings forgiveness." Not Bryn, who stood behind them, tears streaming down her cheeks. That memory still plays like a film burned into my mind. My father's hand on my shoulder, pushing me up those stairs. My mother's voice, calm and cold, saying, "You'll come down when you've learned." It wasn't a day or two, it was months. 3 long, endless months. Sometimes I'd hear rain hammering on the roof, drowning out my sobs. Sometimes, I'd whisper to the cracks in the ceiling, pretending they were listening. And every night, I'd stare out that small attic window, wondering if anyone cared that I was up there. No one did. When they finally opened the door, it was my mother who unlatched the lock. She looked at me like I was something she regretted. "You've changed," she said, as if it was a compliment. Then she turned and left. I wasn't allowed to talk about it after that. It became the family's dark season, something they buried under polite smiles and Sunday clothes. When I turned 18, I left and never looked back. Now, standing here again, I could feel that same tension clinging to the air, like the house itself remembered what it had done. I walked to the back door and stepped outside. The backyard was overgrown. The garden my mother once tended now a tangle of weeds. And yet, it was peaceful in a way that made me uneasy. I could almost hear faint echoes of Bryn's laughter, her soft voice calling me to play. She used to follow me everywhere when we were little. She'd bring me daisies and say, "You're my favorite sister." Then one day, she wasn't my sister anymore. She was my accuser. I took out my phone and looked her up. Bryn Cole, now Bryn Adler. Married, successful, an interior designer with a smiling photo on her company's website. Her bio described her as warm, family-oriented, and driven. The kind of woman my parents always wanted me to be. I wondered if she ever thought about me. If she ever remembered the screams echoing from the attic while she played piano downstairs. I needed to know the truth, not just about the money, but about why they all turned against me so easily. The town was small, everyone knew everyone. Finding her wouldn't be difficult, but confronting her would be something else entirely. As I stood in the overgrown yard, the wind picked up, making the branches groan against the roof. I looked up at the attic window again. The late afternoon light caught the glass just right, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw movement, something shifting inside. My chest tightened. The house was supposed to be empty. I took a step closer, squinting. but the shadow was gone. Maybe it was just my mind replaying old fears. Or maybe… no, I wasn't imagining it. The faintest flicker of light glowed in the attic window then gone. Like someone striking a match in the dark. I told myself I'd come back tomorrow in daylight, that I'd check properly. But as I turned away from the house, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't know it yet, but Bryn wasn't the scared little sister I remembered. She'd become someone far more dangerous. When Bryn opened her front door, she froze like she'd seen a ghost, and in a way, she had. I hadn't planned what I'd say to her. There's no script for confronting the person who helped destroy your life. But when I stood on her doorstep that morning, heart pounding in my chest, all the words I'd rehearsed vanished. I just wanted to see her face, to see what 11 years of lies looked like. The house was perfect. Bright, modern, with a manicured lawn and flowers that matched the color of the shutters. Everything about it screamed success. The kind of success my parents always wanted to parade around. Bryn had become exactly who they molded her to be: refined, composed, admired. I rang the doorbell once. When the door opened, time stopped. She looked almost exactly the same: soft blonde hair, wide hazel eyes, and that same careful smile she used to wear when she wanted people to like her. But when she saw me, the color drained from her face. "Marin?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hey, Bryn," I said quietly. "Surprised?" She blinked a few times, as if trying to convince herself I was real. Then she forced a smile. "It's been so long. Wow, I didn't expect to ever see you here again." "Yeah," I said. "I didn't expect to come back either." There was an awkward pause. Then, perhaps out of politeness or guilt, she stepped aside. "Come in." The air inside was cool, fragrant with candles and polished wood. Her house looked like something out of a magazine. Everything had its place. Every picture frame perfectly aligned. She'd built herself a life where everything appeared flawless. We sat across from each other in her spotless living room. I noticed the family photos on the mantel: her husband, and their 2 little boys. In every picture, her smile was dazzling. But now, in person, it didn't quite reach her eyes. "So," she said after a long silence, "what brings you back?" "Closure, I guess. Maybe curiosity." She shifted in her seat. "About what?" "The house. The attic." Her expression faltered. "Marin, that was a long time ago." "Not for me," I said softly. "I still wake up some nights thinking I'm up there. You remember, don't you?" She avoided my gaze, tracing her fingers along the edge of her coffee cup. "Mom and Dad thought they were doing what was best. You were difficult back then." "Difficult?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "I was 16. You know I didn't take that money." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "You knew it wasn't me, Bryn. I could see it in your face even then. You just stood there while they dragged me upstairs." She shook her head, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't have a choice. You don't understand what it was like living with them after you left." She stopped herself and sighed. "It doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to me," I said sharply. She flinched at the tone. For a moment, the perfect, polished facade cracked. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back after all this time?" "Because I saw the house," I said simply. "And I realized the truth is still locked in that attic, just like I was." Something flickered in her expression: fear, maybe, or guilt. "The house?" she repeated. "Yes," I said. "I went inside yesterday. Someone's been there recently." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, lights were on, footprints in the dust. The attic isn't as empty as you think." Bryn looked shaken. "That's impossible. No one's lived there since Mom and Dad passed." I tilted my head. "You sure about that?" Before she could respond, her husband walked in, a tall man in a gray suit, his expression polite but wary. "Everything okay, Bryn?" Yes," she said quickly. "This is my sister." His eyebrows rose slightly. "I didn't know you had a sister." I smiled thinly. "Most people don't." The tension in the room thickened. He extended a hand, but his eyes were cold, calculating. I could tell immediately that he knew something, or that Bryn had told him a version of the story that painted me as the villain. We exchanged meaningless pleasantries, but every word felt like a lie. When he finally excused himself to take a call, I turned back to Bryn. "You never told him, did you?" She hesitated. Told him what? The truth. About me. About what happened. Her silence was my answer. I stood up, picking up my purse. You always were good at pretending, Bryn. But lies have a way of rotting everything they touch. Even perfect houses. She rose too, her voice trembling. What are you planning to do? I paused at the doorway and looked back at her. I'm not sure yet, but I think it's time someone opened that attic again. As I left, I saw her husband watching from the hallway. His phone lowered, his eyes following me until I was gone. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Bryn had been nervous, terrified even, but not because she was guilty. It was something else. Something she wasn't telling me. When I reached the end of the street, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Through the reflection of her house, I saw a curtain move upstairs. A figure watching me leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of that attic window burned in my mind. I told myself I'd go back in the morning, just to see for myself what or who was still there. When I went back inside the next morning, I found something waiting in the attic that proved I'd never been alone up there. The attic smelled exactly the same: dust, decay, and secrets. The air hit me the moment I pushed open the door, thick, stale, and heavy with the scent of rotting wood and insulation. The sunlight filtering through the single attic window illuminated clouds of dust swirling in the air, tiny particles that felt alive like they'd been waiting for me. The floorboards creaked under my shoes as I stepped inside. My heart pounded, not from fear of ghosts but from memory. Every corner, every shadow was familiar. The small cot where I used to sleep sat in the same place, covered by the same threadbare blanket my mother had tossed at me all those years ago. Even the dent in the wall where I'd thrown my old shoe in anger was still there. It was like time had stopped. I walked slowly around the room, fingertips brushing against relics of a life that had once been mine: broken furniture, dusty photo frames, boxes of forgotten things. The heat pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, just like before. I'd told myself coming here would help me move on, but instead it felt like stepping back into the same prison. Then I saw it. The floorboard near the cot, the one that had always creaked louder than the rest. I knelt down and pulled at it, the wood giving way with a dry snap. Beneath it, exactly where I'd left it, was a small leather notebook. My diary. My breath caught. I brushed the dust off its cover. My initials still faintly visible on the front. M.C. I opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed but intact, filled with the cramped handwriting of a 16-year-old desperate to be heard. I flipped through the entries, each one a piece of the hell I'd lived through. Day 3. It's so hot I can barely breathe. Mom hasn't brought food since yesterday. Day 10. I think Bryn's the one who took the money. She won't even look at me. Day 18. I heard Dad downstairs laughing. I wonder if he even remembers I'm up here. My hands trembled as I read, the memories flooding back in painful detail. But then, halfway through the book, something changed. The handwriting wasn't mine anymore. The ink was darker, the letters sharper, older. The first line made my stomach twist. She cries too much. Mother says she'll stop eventually. I turned the page. It's easier when she sleeps. I just have to ignore the noise. Another page. Mother says we must keep her quiet. She can't tell anyone. The words blurred as I tried to make sense of them. Whoever wrote these pages had done so after me. Someone else had used this diary. Someone who knew I'd been up here. My pulse pounded in my ears. I scanned the last entry, dated months after I'd left. The attic's ready again. Mother says we may need it soon. I dropped the book, my hands shaking. Ready again? For who? The silence of the attic seemed to press closer around me. I took out my phone and snapped pictures of the entries, just in case. Then I froze. There was a faint mark on the floor beside the cot, 2 sets of footprints. One small, one larger. The dust had been disturbed recently. Someone had been here. The rational part of my brain wanted to believe it was an animal, or maybe a realtor checking the property. But deep down, I knew better. The footprints were deliberate, spaced evenly, leading toward the attic door. And one more thing, on the far side of the room, leaning against the wall, was something that hadn't been there before: a half-empty water bottle. Modern, plastic, with condensation still visible inside. My chest tightened. Someone had been here recently. I turned toward the door, instinct screaming at me to leave. But curiosity rooted me in place. My flashlight beam swept across the rafters, the cracked beams, the piles of junk. Then, near the corner, something metallic glinted in the light. I crouched and reached out. It was a small key, rusted but familiar. The kind my father used to keep on his belt. I remembered the way it used to jingle when he'd walk toward the attic, slow, heavy steps, each one making my heart race. I slipped the key into my pocket and stood. The silence in the attic was thick now, oppressive. I took one last look around before heading toward the stairs, my phone still in my hand. I snapped one more photo, the cot, the diary, the window, proof that I hadn't imagined it. But just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A creak, soft, deliberate. Someone was standing in the hallway below. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The sound of footsteps followed, slow and measured. I stepped backward, heart racing, scanning for a weapon, for anywhere to hide. The old trunk by the wall was half open. I slipped behind it, crouching low, holding my breath. The attic door creaked open. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and human. Whoever it was stepped inside, the boards groaning under their weight. I watched through the crack in the trunk as a flashlight beam swept across the room. It lingered on the cot, then on the open diary lying on the floor. The beam shifted and stopped. Right on the trunk where I was hiding. My heart slammed in my chest. The footsteps came closer, and closer. The flashlight beam grew brighter until it filled my vision, then suddenly flicked off. Silence. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. I didn't dare move. Then the door creaked again, and the footsteps retreated down the stairs. I waited until I heard the front door slam shut before I moved. When I finally stepped out, my legs were shaking. I didn't know who that was, but I knew it wasn't a stranger. The key in my pocket felt heavy, burning against my palm. I turned just in time to hear the floorboard creak behind me and saw a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Someone else had been inside that attic, and they didn't want me to know who they were. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flashlight beam sweeping across the attic, stopping inches from where I was hiding. The sound of those careful, deliberate footsteps replayed in my mind over and over until the lines between memory and paranoia blurred. When the sun finally rose, I was still sitting on the couch of my motel room, clutching the key I'd found. My hands were trembling, and no amount of coffee could steady them. I had no idea who that person was, but something told me it wasn't just a trespasser or thrill seeker. Whoever had been in the attic knew the house, knew where to look, and knew I was there. After pacing for nearly an hour, I called the only person I trusted from my old life, Brooke Avery. She'd been my best friend before everything fell apart. Before my parents told everyone I'd been sent away for treatment. Brooke had always believed me, even when the whole town didn't. She answered on the third ring. "Marin, I can't believe it's you. I need your help," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "It's about the house. Something's not right." We met at a small cafe in town, one that hadn't changed since high school. She looked older but kind still, the same girl who used to sneak me notes during class. When I told her about the attic, the diary, the footprints, and the flashlight, her expression shifted from concern to unease. "Are you sure it wasn't a squatter?" she asked. I thought that too, but whoever it was left the second they realized I was. "There," I said, "and they dropped something." I slid the rusty key across the table. She picked it up carefully, frowning, like something from a storage chest. "It was my father's," I said quietly. "I'd know that shape anywhere. He used to wear it on his belt." Brooke looked up sharply. "Marin, your dad's dead. You told me he passed before your mom." "That's what Bryn told me," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "But I never saw a death certificate. No obituary, no grave. Just her word." Brooke's expression darkened. "You think she lied?" "I think," I said slowly, "that everyone in my family has been lying for a very long time." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You want me to dig into it, don't you?" "Yes. Property records, death notices, anything tied to my parents or the house." "Something's off," Brooke nodded. "Give me a day." That evening I drove back to the house. I knew it was stupid, but something inside me wouldn't rest until I went back to the attic in daylight. I needed to see if anything else had been moved. The house felt different this time, colder, emptier. Dust motes floated through streaks of light from the broken window panes. Every sound felt amplified, as though the house itself was holding its breath. When I reached the attic again, the cot was exactly how I'd left it. The diary was gone. My heart plummeted. I checked the floor, the corners, the trunk, nothing. Whoever had been there last night had taken it. Panic clawed its way up my throat. That diary wasn't just words, it was evidence. Proof that someone else had written those twisted entries. And now it was gone. I snapped photos of the empty floor and fresh footprints leading to the stairs. My hands were shaking so hard that most of the images came out blurry. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A faint smear on the wall near the window, dark red, almost brown. Dried blood. The breath hitched in my throat. I reached out, touching it carefully. It was old, but not that old. Maybe weeks, maybe less. I bolted out of the attic and down the stairs, my heart hammering. When I reached my car, I stopped short. Across the road, parked beneath the trees, was a dark sedan. Its windows were tinted, and though I couldn't see who was inside, I could feel their gaze on me. I climbed into my car and started the engine. The sedan didn't move. It just sat there, idling, watching. I drove straight to Brooke's office, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. She greeted me with a grim expression. "I found something," she said, pushing a few printed pages across her desk. The first was a property deed. My parents had sold a portion of the family land the year after I left home for almost $500,000. But that wasn't the shocking part. The document was signed under my name, my own signature. The second document was a bank statement showing a transfer of the same amount to a private account in Bryn's name. My stomach dropped. "That's forgery," I whispered. Brooke nodded. "It's worse. That account's still active. Someone's been using it recently." I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. So they didn't just blame me, they stole everything that was supposed to be mine. Brooke hesitated, then slid over one more page. It was a copy of an obituary, my father's. But it wasn't from 11 years ago, it was dated only 6 months earlier. I stared at the print, my vision swimming. "That's impossible. Bryn told me he died years ago." Brooke's voice was barely a whisper. "Then maybe she didn't want you to know he was still alive." My hands went cold. If he'd been alive all this time, maybe he'd been the one in the attic. Maybe he'd been watching me. The pieces started falling into place like shards of broken glass, each one cutting deeper. The diary, the footprints, the car outside it, all led to one horrifying possibility. And when I saw who signed those papers, I realized my parents hadn't just punished me, they'd erased me. The attic smelled exactly the same: dust, decay, and secrets. The moment I opened that narrow attic door, the smell hit me like a wave of memory. I wasn't ready for thick dust, old wood, and the faint, sour scent of rot. Time hadn't softened this place. It had preserved it like an open wound. The wooden ladder groaned as I climbed, each creak echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat. My hand brushed against cobwebs, the sticky threads clinging to my fingers. When I finally pulled myself into the attic, the light from my flashlight danced across the space, revealing shapes half buried in shadow boxes, broken furniture, and the same narrow cot that had once been my prison. The blanket was still there. The same thin, gray fabric I used to curl up under when the nights turned cold and long. It was covered in dust now, but I could still make out the faint pattern of flowers. I remembered tracing those patterns with my finger, whispering stories to myself to drown out the silence. I walked around slowly, my shoes crunching over dead insects and brittle wood chips. The air was heavy, unmoving. I felt like I had stepped out of the present and back into the same suffocating summer that had ended my childhood. In the far corner, I noticed a wooden trunk I didn't remember being there before. My pulse quickened as I crouched beside it. The brass latch was rusted but still intact. I pulled gently until it creaked open. Inside were old linens, a cracked photograph frame, and a small leather notebook with frayed edges. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that notebook. It was mine. I picked it up with trembling hands, brushing away the thick dust on the cover. My initials MC were still carved into the leather. I remembered doing it with a penknife my father had confiscated from me the day he caught me sketching. Instead of doing chores, he'd called me careless. I'd called it art. I opened the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable mine, jagged and desperate. Day 2. I can't tell if it's morning or night anymore. The window doesn't give much light. I'm hungry. I just want to go home. Day 11. I hear Bryn's voice sometimes. I don't think she knows I can hear her. Day 21. I stopped crying today. I don't think anyone would care even if I screamed. My eyes blurred with tears as I flipped through page after page of the life I had tried to forget. Every sentence bled loneliness. Every word was a bruise turned permanent. But halfway through, something changed. The handwriting wasn't mine anymore. The letters were heavier, the pen strokes sharper. I frowned, reading the next entry. She keeps crying. Mother says it's her fault. I wish she'd stop. Mother says to keep her quiet. Says people will start to ask questions. I froze. The page was dated weeks after I'd been freed. I turned another page, my pulse thudding in my ears. Mother says the attic will be ready again soon. She said some lessons have to be repeated. My stomach twisted. The diary slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. Someone else had been in this attic after me. Someone who knew what had happened and wrote about it like it was routine. My mother's name, Mother says. The way it was phrased, detached, obedient, made me think of Bryn. I crouched and picked up the notebook again, flipping to the last page. The final entry was short, almost scrawled in panic. I heard her walking again. She knows. The air around me felt suddenly colder. I could hear the faint whistle of wind through the cracked window, but underneath it, something else. A sound too deliberate to be the house settling. A footstep. I turned slowly toward the attic door. The floor creaked once soft, drawn out. Someone was there. My flashlight beam flicked toward the sound. Nothing. Only shadows, shifting between beams of light. But my instincts screamed that I wasn't alone. I backed up a few steps, my heart pounding. The silence was deafening. Then, faintly, I heard another sound, a steady rhythm, like someone breathing, slow and controlled, just beyond the door. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. No answer. I took a shaky step forward, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The beam flickered, caught the edge of something metallic near the doorframe. I moved closer, squinting. It was a small hook bolted into the wall, newer than everything else in the attic. A thick rope hung from it, frayed but sturdy. It hadn't been there before. My hands went cold. I scanned the rest of the room, noticing small changes I hadn't caught earlier. Boxes stacked differently. A broken chair that looked freshly moved. A water bottle half hidden behind the cot. Someone had been staying up here. Recently, the house had been empty for years, yet this attic was anything but abandoned. I forced myself to move toward the window, just to breathe fresh air. When I looked out, the overgrown backyard stretched beneath the morning sun. But at the edge of the property, half hidden behind the trees, was a black car, parked, engine running. I couldn't see who was inside, but I could feel the weight of their gaze even from up here. I stepped back, heart racing. I had to get out. Now. I grabbed the diary and turned toward the stairs, but then I froze. The attic door was open wider than I'd left it. My breath hitched. Someone had come up while I was reading. I stepped back, clutching the flashlight. "Who's there?" I demanded again, louder this time. Nothing, just the low groan of the house shifting under its own weight. Then creak. A single, deliberate footstep. I turned the flashlight toward the sound. The beam landed on the far corner, where the shadows seemed darker than they should have been. For a split second, I swore I saw the outline of someone standing. There, tall, unmoving, watching me. My flashlight flickered once, then died. I turned just in time to hear the floorboard creak behind me, and saw a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Someone else had been inside that attic, and they didn't want me to know who they were. I stumbled down the attic stairs so fast I nearly fell, clutching the dusty diary against my chest like a shield. My flashlight was dead, my heart was pounding, and all I could think about was the shadow I'd seen or thought I'd seen moving in that corner. By the time I reached the bottom floor, I was drenched in sweat, every nerve in my body buzzing. Outside, the air felt colder than before, sharp and biting against my skin. I looked back once at the house, at the small attic window staring down at me, and swore I saw the faintest flicker of movement again. A shape, retreating into darkness. I didn't wait to confirm it. I ran to my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a long minute just trying to breathe. My hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition, gravel crunching under the tires as I drove away from that house faster than I'd driven in years. Back in my motel room, I spread the diary open on the table. The last few pages, the ones written in the unfamiliar handwriting, taunted me. Whoever had written them hadn't just known what happened to me. They'd been there, maybe even after I left. The phrase, "the attic will be ready again," echoed in my head like a curse. I needed help. There was only one person I could trust, Brooke Avery. We hadn't seen each other since high school, but she'd been the only one who'd believed me when my parents told everyone I was ill. I found her number on social media and called. She answered on the second ring, her voice uncertain. "Hello? Brooke? It's Marin." The pause on the other end was long enough for my heart to drop. "Marin, oh my God, I thought you disappeared." "I almost did," I said quietly. "But I need your help. I'm back in town." We met later that afternoon at a small diner off Main Street. Brooke hadn't changed much, her red hair still wild, her eyes still sharp. She looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was real. "You look good," she said, though there was pity in her tone. "Different. I feel different," I replied, sliding the diary across the table. "You remember the attic?" Her expression darkened. "Of course I do. Someone else was there," I said. "Recently. I found this diary, but half the entries aren't mine." She frowned and flipped through the pages. "This handwriting, it's not yours." "No," I said. "And the last entry is dated months after I left." Brooke looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think someone else was locked in there?" "I don't know," I said. "But whoever it was, they knew what happened. And they were writing about Mother's orders." Brooke's eyes widened. "You think your mom did it again?" "I think she never stopped," I whispered. We spent hours at that booth, piecing together fragments of the past, talking about how strange things had gotten after I left. Brooke told me that my parents became reclusive, stopped attending church, and cut off most contact with the town. She'd tried to visit once, but my mother turned her away at the door. "She looked different," Brooke said. "Like she was hiding something." When I told her about the shadow, about the attic not being empty, her face went pale. "You need to be careful," she said. "If someone's watching that house, they know you're back." Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. "You think they're following me?" "Wouldn't be the first time," she muttered. "You were their scapegoat once. They might not like that you're digging up what they buried." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. Every sound outside my motel window made me flinch. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of the attic, the creaking wood, the heavy air, the faint whisper of a voice saying, "Keep her quiet." The next morning, I woke to find a text on my phone from an unknown number. "Stop looking." That was it. 2 words that froze me in place. No signature, no number I recognized. Just those words. I showed it to Brooke later that day. She stared at the screen, then at me. "Marin, you need to go to the police." "I can't," I said. "Not yet. Not until I know what really happened." "Then let me help you," she said firmly. "I still have contacts at the paper. We can dig up property records, hospital files, anything tied to your family." I nodded, though every instinct in me screamed that this was going to get worse before it got better. That evening, Brooke called me again. Her voice was tense. "You need to come over. I found something." When I got to her apartment, she was already pacing. She handed me a printed document. "This is your family's property record from 11 years ago. The land behind your house? It was sold right after you left." "So?" I asked. "So the sale was made under your name." I stared at her. "That's impossible. I was locked in that attic." "Exactly," she said. "Someone forged your signature." I skimmed the page, my blood running cold when I reached the buyer's information. The payment had been transferred into an account belonging to Bryn Cole. I looked up at Brooke, disbelief and fury colliding inside me. "My sister sold my land using my name?" "It gets worse," she said. I traced the account. It's still active. My vision blurred for a second. "So they didn't just blame me, they took everything that was supposed to be mine." Brooke hesitated, then slid over another page. "A death certificate. And this," she said quietly, "is for your father." But the date wasn't. From 11 years ago, it was from 6 months earlier. I looked up slowly. 6 months? She nodded. "Marin, your father didn't die when Bryn said he did." The room seemed to tilt. The attic, the diary, the shadow, it all came rushing back. If my father had been alive all this time, then maybe he'd been in that attic too. And when I saw who signed those papers, I realized my parents hadn't just punished me, they'd erased me. My own sister had signed my name to the sale. I stared at the document for what felt like forever, the letters blurring into each other until they didn't look like words anymore. My signature, my name scrawled at the bottom of that paper like an accusation carved in ink. I hadn't signed it. I hadn't even known the sale happened. Yet there it was, the proof that my sister had stolen what little was left of my life. The date on the sale was exactly 3 weeks after the summer I'd been locked in the attic. 3 weeks after I'd been released, pale and hollow-eyed, and sent away to a relative's house for recovery. While I'd been trying to piece myself together, Bryn had been busy erasing me from our family's history. Brooke watched me from across the table, worry flickering in her eyes. "Marin," she said carefully, "we can take this to a lawyer. This is forgery, fraud." I shook my head slowly, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "No, not yet. I want to know why first." She sighed, knowing that tone in my voice meant I wouldn't stop until I got my answers. When I left her apartment, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the printed pages spread out on the passenger seat. The evidence was there, proof that Bryn had sold off part of our land, forged my name, and benefited from it. But what gnawed at me more than the betrayal was the timing. Why had she needed the money then? And why was my father's death faked or hidden for all these years? The pieces didn't fit, but I was done waiting for them to make sense. That night, I drove back to my motel and pulled out the old key I'd found in the attic. I turned it over in my hand, tracing the rusted grooves. My father's key, the same one he'd used when he came to lock the attic door every night all those years ago. If he was still alive 6 months ago, what had he been doing? Hiding? Watching? I opened my laptop and searched his name, Leonard Cole. There were no recent records except one brief mention in an obscure local news article. Local contractor Leonard Cole hospitalized following workplace accident. No date of death, no obituary, just that. My hands trembled as I scrolled further. Then I found an insurance claim from the same company he used to work for. The payout had gone to Bryn Adler. My sister. Every path, every document, every secret led back to her. I called Brooke again. "I need you to dig into that hospital record," I said. "Find out where he was treated, and if he's really dead this time." She agreed, though her tone carried a warning. "You're walking into dangerous territory, Marin. If they went this far to hide something, they won't stop now." I didn't care. I needed the truth. The next day, I drove to Bryn's house. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to see her face when I showed her the proof. The drive felt longer than it should have, the air thick with anticipation. When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed her husband's car was gone. Good. When Bryn opened the door, she looked startled, her hand gripping the edge of the frame. "Marin, I wasn't expecting." I held up the documents. "You forged my name." Her expression didn't change right away, but her eyes, those wide hazel eyes that used to look so innocent, flickered. "What are you talking about?" "Don't," I snapped. "The land sale. The forged signature. The money that went into your account. Don't you dare lie to me again." A moment, she didn't speak. Then she exhaled slowly and stepped back. "Come inside." The house was quiet, the air scented with lemon polish and fear. We sat in the same living room where I'd confronted her last time. But this time, I wasn't uncertain. "I found out about the sale," I said. "And the fake death certificate. You didn't just lie, Bryn. You took everything." "Why?" Her eyes darted away. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," she said softly. "Dad said it was just paperwork. He said you wouldn't care." "Dad?" I repeated, stunned. "You're saying he knew? He wanted to move everything under my name before things got complicated." "What things?" I demanded. Her voice cracked. "The investigation." I leaned forward, heart racing. "What investigation?" She bit her lip, tears pooling in her eyes. "The money Dad used for the school fund, it wasn't his. It belonged to the company. He was supposed to build a community center, but he pocketed part of the budget. When the company found out, he panicked. He said we had to protect the family name, so he blamed you. Said you'd stolen it." The room spun. "You let him," I said, voice breaking. "You let them lock me up and call me a thief to protect him?" Bryn wiped at her eyes, trembling. "I was 16, Marin. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I did what he said it would end. But it never did." Her words hit like shards of glass. For years, I'd built my hatred around the idea that my parents punished me out of cruelty, not fear. But now I realized it had been both. They'd been desperate to hide a crime, and I had been the perfect scapegoat. I stood, pacing the room. "He's dead now, right? For real this time?" She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. I don't know, she said finally. He was sick after the accident, but I haven't seen a body. Just the paperwork. Stared at her, anger burning away the shock. You forged my name. You buried me to keep his secret. And you think that's just paperwork? Marin, please, no. I cut her off. You don't get to beg for forgiveness. You helped him ruin me, and now you're going to help me destroy what's left of his lies. Her eyes widened in fear. What are you going to do? I picked up the folder of documents from her table and met her gaze. I'm going to finish what he started, but this time, the truth is going to bury him. I walked out before she could speak again, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed like thunder in my chest. Back in my car, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked different, harder, colder. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who'd been trapped in that attic. I felt like someone who'd been born from it. I thought I was chasing justice, but what I was really waking up was a secret that could destroy us all. The truth didn't set me free, it set everything on fire. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. I reached for it, eyes half open, expecting a message from Brooke. Instead, I saw an unknown number and 2 words that chilled me to my core. Stop digging. The same message as before. Only this time, a photo followed it. It was the front of my motel, the door to my room. Taken from outside, just hours ago. My chest tightened. Whoever sent it had been there, close enough to know where I slept. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, the diary, and the folder of documents, and I left. By the time the sun rose over the quiet town, I was sitting in a cafe parking lot, watching the road, trying to calm my breathing. Every passing car made my pulse spike. When I finally called Brooke, she was furious. Marin, this isn't just some family drama anymore. Someone's threatening you. I can handle it, I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing even, to myself. No, you can't. You're not safe. She was right, but safety wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted the truth. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt for 11 years, trapped, terrified, powerless. Brooke sighed heavily. At least let me dig into the financial records further. If your father really faked his death, someone must have helped him. Paper trails don't disappear without cooperation. I thanked her, but my mind was elsewhere. The more I thought about the messages, the clearer it became they weren't trying to scare me into leaving. They were warning me to stop before I found something worse. That evening, I drove past Bryn's house. It was dark except for the glow of her living room lights. Her husband's car was gone again. I parked a few houses down, hidden behind a row of trees, and waited. At 8:47, a black sedan pulled into her driveway, the same one I'd seen parked near the old house. A tall man stepped out. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he moved with certainty, like he'd been there before. Bryn met him at the door. They didn't talk long before he handed her a folder. She looked nervous, glancing around as if she knew someone might be watching. Then she stepped aside, and he entered. I started my car and drove away before either of them saw me. My heart was pounding so hard it made my hands shake on the wheel. Whoever that man was, he was connected. Maybe even to my father. By the time I got back to the motel, Brooke had texted me. Found something. Call me now. I did. Her voice was low. Urgent. Your father had offshore accounts. Millions, Marin. But that's not the strange part. What is? Half of it was transferred 6 months ago to a holding company under a fake name. Guess whose? My breath caught. Bryn's? No, Brooke said. Your mother's. I froze. But she's been dead for years. I know. But someone's been using her identity. I can't tell who. Yet, but whoever it is has access to all the old family funds and property deeds. They could be controlling everything from behind the scenes. A sick realization hit me. What if it's not just one of them? What if they're all still connected somehow? Then you're walking right into a trap, Brooke said. You need to go to the police. I can't, I interrupted. Not until I understand what they're hiding. There was a long pause. Then Brooke said quietly, if you won't stop, then at least don't go alone. I didn't answer, because I already knew what I was going to do next. If the people behind this thought they could scare me into silence, they'd underestimated what 11 years in an attic had done to me. Fear was their weapon, but I'd learned to live with it. I decided to confront Bryn one last time, but not with accusations. With bait. The next day I texted her. I have something you'll want to see. Meet me at the diner at 7. She didn't reply, but I knew she'd come. Curiosity was her weakness. I arrived early, sitting in the booth near the window, watching headlights sweep across the street. When she finally walked in, she wasn't alone. Her husband followed, scanning the room like a bodyguard. I forced a smile. You brought backup? Bryn didn't smile back. What's this about, Marin? I slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a photocopy of one of my father's old ledgers, the kind used to track construction payments. Your name's in here, I said. And so is Mom's. Her husband frowned. What are you implying? That my family wasn't just corrupt, they were partners in something bigger. Fraud, embezzlement, who knows what else. Bryn's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I said, leaning forward. Because I think you do. I think you've been keeping their secret all these years. And I think it's finally catching up to you. Her husband reached for the envelope, but I snatched it back. Tell your mystery friend in the black sedan I said hello. Bryn's face went white. You saw him? Oh, I saw plenty, I said. Including you handing him something. Her husband's hand twitched. Maybe you should stop talking. I smiled. Maybe you should start listening. Because I'm done hiding. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. The silence between us was suffocating. Then Bryn whispered, You shouldn't have come back. She stood abruptly and walked out, her husband close behind. I didn't stop her. I didn't need to. The fear in her eyes told me enough. That night, when I got back to the motel, my door was ajar. I stepped inside slowly, every nerve on edge. The room was empty, but the envelope from the diner, the one I'd left on the table, was gone. On the mirror, written in smudged black marker, were 2 words. Last warning. My reflection stared back at me, eyes cold, heart steady. I picked up my phone and texted Brooke. They want a war. Let's give them one. But when Bryn finally arrived, she wasn't alone, and the man she brought with her made my blood run cold. My father stepped through the door like a ghost wearing my childhood nightmares. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. The light from the diner's flickering sign cast a pale glow over his face, and for an instant, it was like time folded in on itself. He looked exactly the same, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and unreadable, only older, more worn, with lines etched deep into his face like scars carved by guilt. Dad? The word slipped out before I could stop it. He didn't answer. He just stood there beside Bryn, his hands shoved into the pockets of his dark coat, staring at me like I was a stranger. Bryn's voice was steady, too steady. You wanted the truth, Marin? Here he is. I couldn't breathe. My entire life, I'd mourned a man who wasn't even dead. Every ounce of pain, every sleepless night I'd spent trying to forgive a ghost, it had all been for nothing. He stepped forward slowly, his boots scraping against the floor. You shouldn't have come back, he said. His voice was deeper than I remembered. Rougher. You're supposed to be dead, I whispered. He smirked faintly. Guess the world's full of surprises. My knees nearly buckled under the weight of it all. You let them tell me you were gone. You let me think you were buried. Because it was easier that way, he said simply. For everyone. Bryn stayed behind him, silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. Easier? I repeated, my voice trembling. You faked your death, forged my name, stole everything I had, and you think it was easier? He sighed, running a hand down his face like I was a problem he was tired of solving. You always did make things difficult, Marin. I told your mother years ago your emotions were going to ruin this family. That word family hit me like a punch. I clenched my fists. What did you do? What was all this for? He glanced at Bryn before answering. You think the world runs on honesty and hard work? It doesn't. It runs on leverage. I built this family, that house, everything we had, and when things went bad, someone had to take the fall. So you chose me, I said quietly. He shrugged. You were the only one who wouldn't fight back. The casual cruelty in his tone lit something inside me, a slow, burning rage that had been smoldering for 11 years. I took a step toward him, my voice low. You locked me in that attic for months. You made me think I deserved it. His gaze didn't waver. You needed to learn your place. For the first time in my life, I wanted to hit him, to make him feel what I'd felt. But I didn't. I needed to be smarter than that. I turned to Bryn. Did you know he was alive? She hesitated, then nodded. He showed up after Mom died. Said he needed my help to fix things. He promised me he'd make it right. I laughed bitterly. Right? He used you just like he used me. Enough, my father snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. You're not here to lecture us. You're here to listen. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. These are the documents you've been so desperate to find the truth you think you're owed. I didn't move. What's in there? Proof, he said simply. Proof that everything I did was necessary. I stared at him. Necessary? You call lying, stealing, and locking your daughter in an attic necessary? You wouldn't understand, he said. You never did. Your mother and I— Don't you dare talk about her, I snapped. She was as much a part of this as you. Something flickered in his eyes, something almost like guilt, but it was gone in an instant. Bryn stepped forward, tears threatening to spill. Dad, please, just tell her the truth. She deserves to know. He glared at her, his tone cold. You talk too much, Bryn. Her voice broke. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep lying for you. His expression hardened. You already did. There's no going back. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Actually, there is. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I've been recording this entire conversation, I said. Every word. For the first time, he looked rattled. You're bluffing. Am I? I hit the screen and the recording played back the last few minutes, his voice echoing through the diner like poison. He lunged forward, but I stepped back. Go ahead, I said. Hit me again. See how well that looks in court. Marin, Bryn whispered, her voice trembling. You don't understand. He's not the only one. What do you mean? I asked, turning toward her. She looked at me with hollow eyes. Mom didn't just help him hide money. She helped him hide people. I blinked. What? Bryn's voice was shaking now. He wasn't just taking money from the company. He was blackmailing their clients, collecting evidence, recording their crimes, then making them pay to stay quiet. When one of them refused, they disappeared. I could feel my pulse in my throat. You're lying. Bryn shook her head. You wanted to know why he locked you up? Because you found one of his ledgers when you were 16. You weren't supposed to see it. Mom panicked. They thought if they kept you up there long enough, you'd forget. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. That's why she said I needed to learn. That's why no one believed me. My father's jaw tightened. Enough, he said. The pieces were clicking into place, the money, the fake deaths, the diary, the attic ready again. My parents hadn't been punishing me. They'd been silencing me. I looked my father in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. I've already sent copies of the recordings and documents to a journalist. I lied smoothly. If anything happens to me, everything goes public. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled. A cold, hollow smile. You always were your mother's daughter, he said, too stubborn to know when to stop. Maybe, I said quietly, but at least I'm not you. That's when I told him that his mistake was ever letting me out of that attic alive. The next morning, every secret they buried came clawing to the surface. By sunrise, my father's empire of lies was crumbling. Brooke's contact at the local newspaper had already received copies of the recordings, the forged documents, and the property records I'd collected. Within hours, the story hit the news under the headline, Contractor's Family Linked to Decades-Long Fraud and Cover-Up. I watched it unfold from the safety of my motel room, sitting cross-legged on the bed with my laptop open. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls, texts, reporters wanting statements, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was finally out, and for once, it didn't depend on me convincing anyone. It was undeniable. Bryn's perfect image shattered almost instantly. Her company's social media pages filled with angry comments and accusations. Clients withdrew. Her husband publicly distanced himself within a day, claiming ignorance. My father's name resurfaced in old criminal investigations that the company had buried years ago. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part smaller, but still there felt hollow. I'd spent half my life waiting for justice, but seeing it happen so suddenly made the victory feel fragile, like it could shatter if I breathed too hard. By mid-morning, I received a call from Brooke. It's spreading fast, she said. State investigators are reopening 2 old cases tied to your dad's construction firm. It's bigger than I thought. I let out a shaky laugh. I guess they shouldn't have underestimated the attic girl. Brooke chuckled softly, but then her tone darkened. Marin, listen to me. You need to be careful. This isn't over. When people like your father fall, they drag others down with them. You could be in danger. I already am, I said. But at least now it means something. After the call, I decided to visit the house one last time. Not to dig or investigate, just to see it, to make peace with the place that had defined my life. The drive felt strangely calm. The chaos of the outside world seemed distant, almost unreal compared to the quiet stretch of road that led to the Cole property. When I arrived, the house looked the same as it always had, tired, sagging, stubbornly standing against time, but it felt different, lighter, somehow, like it had finally exhaled the breath it had been holding for years. Inside, the air was cooler than before, touched with the faint scent of rain from the cracked window upstairs. I climbed the stairs slowly, every creak echoing memories I no longer feared. When I reached the attic, I hesitated at the threshold. The space was exactly as I'd left it, dust motes swirling in the weak light, the cot still pushed against the wall, the rope hook glinting faintly in the corner. But it no longer felt like a cage. It was just a room now. I walked to the window and looked out. The trees outside swayed gently in the wind, the same trees I'd once stared at through tears, wishing I could touch them. Now, I could go anywhere I wanted. That's when I saw it. A small box, sitting in the middle of the floor. It hadn't been there before. My pulse spiked. I knelt beside it cautiously. The box was old, wooden with a brass latch. I flipped it open, expecting dust or scraps of paper. Instead, inside was a folded piece of stationery. My mother's handwriting covered the page in elegant, slanted script. "Marin," it began. "If you are reading this, then the truth has already come out. I wish I could say I'm proud of you, but pride was something I never learned to give. I was weak, afraid of losing everything, and in the process, I lost the only thing that mattered: my daughters. Your father believed control was love. I let him convince me it was survival. I see now that we were both wrong. If I could take back what we did, I would. You didn't deserve that attic. You deserved freedom." The letter trembled in my hands. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. At the bottom, one last line caught my breath. "The attic kept our sins. Let it keep our ghosts too." I folded the letter and tucked it back into the box. "Goodbye," I whispered. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the stairs, a faint noise stopped me. Footsteps. Not the old echo of memory, but real, the solid footsteps on the floor below. I froze. "Brooke?" I called out, but there was no reply. The sound grew louder, measured, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were coming up the stairs. I looked around for something to defend myself with. My flashlight lay on the cot. I grabbed it and waited, heart racing. Then, the attic door creaked open. Bryn stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands shaking. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Her voice cracked. "I had to see you. Everything's falling apart, Marin. They're calling me, asking questions. Dad's gone, the police are everywhere. What did you do?" I told the truth. I said simply. She stepped closer, desperation in her eyes. "You don't understand. There's more. He kept things hidden here, files, money, blackmail. If they find them, we're both finished." I shook my head. "You mean you're finished? I have nothing left to lose." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think you're free now? You're not. He made sure of that." Bryn spun around, her face draining of color. "Someone else is here," she whispered. The sound of slow, heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs again. I grabbed Bryn's arm. "Who is it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "If it's who I think it is, we're in trouble." The footsteps stopped outside the door. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then came the sound of a latch turning. The attic door swung shut, sealing us inside. But as the flames flickered out, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, the same ones I used to fear every night. It wasn't a ghost, it was Bryn. For a split second, the room felt weightless, suspended between past and present. The same sound that used to paralyze me as a child, the creak of slow, deliberate footsteps on the attic stairs, was happening again. But this time I wasn't alone. Bryn clutched my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. The latch clicked, and the door swung open. The flashlight in my hand trembled as I lifted it toward the figure stepping through. My breath caught. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't my father. It was Bryn only, not the Bryn standing beside me. This one was younger, her hair shorter, her face gaunt, her skin bruised. Her eyes were wide and vacant, filled with the kind of fear that didn't fade with time. Then she was gone. The light flickered, and the space where she'd been was empty. I blinked hard, heart hammering. "Did you see that?" I gasped. Bryn stared at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I see her every night." "What?" Her voice shook as she backed toward the wall. "I wasn't lying when I said he made me do it. After you left, after Mom died, he locked me up here. The air left my lungs." "What are you talking about?" "He said I needed to learn what you'd learned," she whispered. "He said it was my punishment for telling someone about the money. He told me I had your diary. He made me rewrite parts of it." The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. "The handwriting, the later entries, they're mine," she said, her voice cracking. "He made me write them. Told me if I didn't, I'd end up worse than you." I staggered backward, the truth unraveling everything I thought I knew. "How long?" 2 months, she said. 2 months after you left, I was up here. He made me pretend it was you. He said if anyone ever came asking questions, I'd tell them you'd come back, that the attic was for you." Tears burned behind my eyes. Not from pity but from rage. Rage at what that man had done to both of us. Bryn sank onto the cot, her face buried in her hands. "When he finally let me out, he said I owed him. He made me sign the papers. Made me lie to you. I tried to stop it, but every time I tried, he..." Her voice broke. "I couldn't fight him, Marin. I was scared." The silence that followed was thick with grief and disbelief. I stared at her, the sister I'd hated for years, realizing she had been as trapped as I was, just in a different way. I knelt beside her, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me?" she asked weakly. I didn't answer, because once, I wouldn't have. We sat there for a long moment, 2 women broken by the same monster, surrounded by the dust of our shared prison. Then Bryn lifted her head, eyes full of something fierce. "We have to finish this." "How?" "There's a safe," she said, wiping her tears. "Behind that wall." She pointed to a section of paneling I hadn't noticed before, newer wood fitted unevenly against the old boards. "He kept everything in there, the blackmail files, the ledgers, the proof of what he did." I stood, adrenaline replacing shock. "Then we end this now." We pried the panels loose with a broken piece of metal from the trunk. It took strength neither of us knew we had, but soon the hidden compartment revealed itself, a small steel safe, built right into the wall beams. Bryn knelt beside it. "The key," she whispered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old key I'd found weeks ago. My father's key, the one that had haunted me. It slid into the lock perfectly. When the door creaked open, dust and the scent of oil filled the air. Inside were stacks of folders, envelopes full of cash, and photos, hundreds of them. We began to sift through them, each file heavier than the last. There were names of local officials, police officers, business owners, people my father had blackmailed and bought, and at the very bottom of the stack, I found a small cassette tape marked June 14, The Attic. Bryn's face went white. That was the night he... I didn't let her finish. I found a small tape recorder in the box and pressed play. The sound that came through was faint at first, static, creaks, footsteps. Then my father's voice. "She won't stop crying," he said coldly. "I told you to make her quiet." Then another voice, my mother's, trembling. "She's just a child, Leonard." He laughed. "So was I when I learned the world doesn't care about weakness." The tape clicked off. Bryn covered her mouth, sobbing. I sat frozen, my pulse deafening in my ears. There it was, the final proof of what they'd done. The ghosts we'd both been trying to silence, captured forever on tape. Suddenly, a loud noise below made us both jump, a door slamming shut. Bryn's head jerked toward the stairs. "He's here," she whispered. My blood ran cold. "He's supposed to be in custody." She shook her head. "He always finds a way." I grabbed the folder of files and the tape, shoving them into my bag. "We're leaving. Now." But before we could move, his voice echoed up the stairs. Calm. Familiar. "Girls," he called softly. "You've made quite a mess." Bryn clutched my arm. "Please, Marin. Don't let him take me again." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay steady. "He's not taking either of us." The footsteps grew louder, slow, steady, certain. I scanned the room desperately for an escape. There was none. The only window was too small to climb through, and the stairs were blocked by his shadow. Bryn whimpered. "He's going to kill us." No, I whispered, gripping the flashlight tighter. Not this time. As his shadow filled the doorway, I met his gaze head-on. My pulse steady despite the fear clawing inside me. Come on then, I said quietly. Let's finish what you started. We thought exposing him would be the end, but the end was still waiting for us, upstairs. The attic had always been our prison, but now it became our battleground. He stepped into the attic with the same cold composure I remembered from my childhood, every movement slow, calculated, as if he still owned the air we breathed. His presence filled the small space like a storm gathering at sea. Bryn shrank back, pressing against the wall. I stood between her and him, my hands clenched at my sides. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I refused to step back. Still protecting her, Marin? He asked, his voice laced with mock amusement. After everything she did? I glared at him. After everything you did, you don't get to talk about protection. His lips twitched into a faint smirk. I did what was necessary. You never understood that. Locking your daughters in an attic isn't necessary, I said through clenched teeth. It's evil, he sighed. Like I was being unreasonable. You two were liabilities. You knew too much, and I couldn't have that. Not when the company's future depended on silence. You ruined your family for money, I shot back. For control. Family, he repeated softly, shaking his head. That word doesn't mean what you think it does. Family is leverage, Marin. It's loyalty. It's about keeping the weak ones in line. Bryn's voice cracked behind me. You're sick. He looked at her, then really looked, and for a second, I thought I saw something human flicker in his eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it came. You always were too soft, Bryn. Just like your mother. Don't talk about her, she snapped. You broke her. She broke herself. I took a step forward, blocking his view of her. You came back here for those files, didn't you? I said. The ones we just found. His expression hardened. Where are they? Somewhere you'll never find them. He started toward me, but I stood my ground. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. I'm not 16 anymore, I said, my voice trembling but steady. You can't lock me away and pretend I don't exist. He stopped inches from me, his eyes boring into mine. You think this is about the past? This is about survival. Mine. Yours. If those files go public, we're all finished. That's the point, I said. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron. You think this ends with me? You think the world will thank you for dragging this into the light? You're naive, Marin. There are people far worse than me who don't want those files out. They'll come for you. For both of you. I yanked my arm free. Then let them. Bryn moved closer, her voice trembling but fierce. We're not scared of you anymore. He turned toward her, eyes blazing. You should be. I saw it happen before she did, his hand raised, his body tensing. For a split second, I was 16 again, cornered, helpless. But not this time. I lunged forward, shoving him back hard. His shoulder hit one of the old wooden beams, cracking it. Dust rained down from the ceiling. He stumbled, caught himself, and laughed low, dark, the same laugh that used to echo through my nightmares. You really are your mother's daughter, he sneered. Defiant to the end. Maybe, I said, breathing hard. But at least I have a conscience. The tension in the room was thick, electric. Bryn moved toward the window, glancing outside like she was calculating an escape. The police are coming, she lied. We called them before we came. He turned toward her, eyes narrowing. You wouldn't dare. She's not lying, I said quickly, stepping closer. They'll be here any minute. His gaze flicked between us, doubt creeping in. You girls always did like to test me. Not anymore, I said. And before I could second-guess myself, I picked up the flashlight and swung. It connected with his arm as he tried to block, the impact jarring my wrist. He roared in pain, stumbling, backward again. The old beam behind him cracked louder this time, splintering under his weight. Dad! Stop! Bryn shouted. He turned toward her, rage contorting his face. Don't you call me that! Another crack then, a sound I'll never forget. The beam gave way completely. He slipped, crashing into the floorboards, and for a moment, I thought he'd gone through the floor. But he caught himself on a wooden trunk, his breathing ragged. I froze, flashlight trembling in my grip. Bryn stared, her hand over her mouth. Help me, he rasped. Don't just stand there. For a long, terrible moment, I didn't move. All I could see was the image of that attic door closing behind me 11 years ago, the darkness swallowing me whole, his footsteps fading as I screamed for mercy. "Marin," Bryn whispered, her voice breaking. "We can't just—" But I didn't hear the rest. I walked slowly toward him, the floor creaking beneath my feet. He looked up at me, eyes glassy, lips trembling. "You don't understand," he gasped. "I was trying to protect us. Everything I did was for you," I said. "It was always for you." I crouched beside him. "You taught me something, though." He blinked, confused. "What?" "That silence doesn't protect anyone, it kills them." He tried to speak again, but his strength was fading. The look in his eyes shifted, anger melting into fear. And for the first time, I saw the truth. He wasn't a monster. He was a coward, a weak man hiding behind cruelty because fear was all he understood. I stood up, my voice steady. "You can beg if you want. I don't forgive you." He closed his eyes. "Marin, please." I turned away. "No." Bryn was crying softly now, her sobs filling the space that had once held mine. The air was heavy with dust, memory, and something like freedom. We didn't touch him. We didn't move. We just stood there. The three of us in that cursed room, the past, collapsing all around us. And for the first time, I realized forgiveness was the one thing I'd never give him. When the floor finally gave way beneath him, it felt like the house was exhaling. The sound was deafening. Wood splintered, nails shrieked against old beams, and in one violent motion, the floor beneath my father cracked open like a fault line. Bryn screamed as his body disappeared through the gap, crashing onto the floor below with a thud that seemed to shake the walls. Then, silence. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. I stumbled back, coughing, staring at the jagged hole where he had stood seconds ago. For a long, suspended moment, I couldn't move. My brain struggled to catch up to what my eyes had seen. "Marin," Bryn whispered, her voice trembling. He fell." I didn't answer. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I forced myself to the edge of the hole, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust below. He lay motionless on the ground floor, half covered by debris. His chest rose once, then stilled. Bryn covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "We have to help him." "No," I said quietly. "It's over." She looked at me in horror. "You can't mean that he's our father." I met her gaze. "He stopped being our father the day he locked that door." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she sank to her knees, her sobs breaking through the silence. I turned away, staring at the cracked floorboards, the faint beams of sunlight slicing through the attic window. Dust glimmered in the air like ashes. Everything I had carried for 11 years, the fear, the anger, the guilt was dissolving, piece by piece. But peace didn't come with it, just emptiness. After a while, I crouched beside Bryn and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." She nodded weakly. We grabbed what little we had, the files, the diary, the tape, and made our way down. The stairs, each step groaning beneath our weight. When we reached the bottom, I couldn't help but glance toward the spot where he'd fallen. He was still there, still. Bryn stopped a few feet away, staring at him like she was waiting for him to breathe again. "I didn't want it to end like this," she whispered. "Neither did I said softly. "But maybe it's the only way it ever could." We stepped out into the fading evening light. The wind picked up, rustling the trees that lined the property. The world outside felt cleaner somehow, as though the house's darkness had finally lifted its grip on everything around it. Bryn and I stood at the edge of the porch for a long moment, looking out over the land that had once been ours, that had once been cursed by silence. "What now?" she asked. "We tell the truth," I said simply. "All of it." She gave a small broken laugh. "You think anyone will believe us?" "They don't have to," I replied. "The proof speaks for itself." We started walking toward my car parked down the drive. I could feel the house at my back, heavy with the ghosts of everything that had happened there. I didn't look back, not once. When we reached the car, Bryn stopped suddenly. "Wait," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Do you smell that?" I frowned. The wind carried something faint but distinct smoke. We turned together. A thin trail of gray was rising from one of the attic windows. Within seconds, it thickened, curling into the sky. "No!" Bryn gasped. No, We ran back toward the house. By the time we reached the porch, the smoke was pouring out in thick waves. The attic window flickered orange, and the faint crackle of fire echoed from above. "It's spreading fast," I said, coughing as the smoke burned my lungs. Bryn's voice broke. "He's still in there!" I hesitated. My mind screamed at me to move, to help, but my body wouldn't obey. That house had taken everything from me. It had trapped me, defined me, destroyed me, and now it was burning itself to the ground. "Marin!" Bryn shouted, gripping my arm. "We have to try." "No," I said hoarsely. "He made his choice." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't just—" The sound of collapsing wood cut her off. Flames exploded through the windows, consuming the old curtains, licking up the walls. The fire was merciless, devouring the place where our nightmares were born. Bryn sobbed, falling to her knees. I crouched beside her, holding her close as the heat washed over us. The house groaned, the roof beginning to cave in. Sparks shot into the sky like fireflies, and for a moment, it looked almost beautiful. We stayed there until the fire trucks arrived, their sirens wailing in the distance, the chaos growing louder as the flames consumed everything. The firefighters rushed past us, shouting orders, spraying water that hissed against the inferno. One of them asked if anyone was inside. I opened my mouth to speak, but stopped. What could I say? That our father was somewhere beneath the floorboards, buried under the ashes of his own cruelty? I just shook my head. "No one," I whispered. He nodded and ran toward the blaze. As the night deepened, I watched the house collapse in on itself, the flames glowing against the dark horizon. The attic window, the one I'd stared through for months, shattered in the heat, sending shards of glass scattering into the grass. Bryn and I stood side by side in silence. When the fire finally died down, only the blackened frame of the house remained. For the first time in my life, there was nothing left of it. No walls, no locks, no ghosts. Just ashes. Bryn turned to me, her face streaked with tears and soot. "What do we do now?" I looked at her, then at the ruins behind us. "We live," I said. "Finally." But as the fire died out, I saw something glint in the ashes, a piece of metal, shaped like a key, still perfectly intact. The fire didn't just destroy the house, it unearthed everything buried beneath it. By morning, the Cole property was surrounded by yellow tape and the hum of recovery crews. The sky was gray, heavy with smoke and the faint metallic tang of burned wood. What was left of our childhood home looked nothing like a house anymore, just blackened beams, twisted metal, and piles of ash. The attic, the walls, the secrets, they were all gone. But I couldn't take my eyes off the key. It glimmered faintly in the soot, half buried beside what used to be the staircase. I crouched, ignoring the warnings from the firefighters still working nearby, and brushed the ashes away until I could lift it. It was the same one I'd found weeks ago, the small, rusted key my father used to carry on his belt. Only now it was clean, polished by the heat, gleaming like something reborn. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the sharp edges against my skin. "Marin," Bryn said quietly from behind me. "Let it go." I didn't look up. "This key started everything. It opened the attic, the trunk, the safe. And it ended it too," she said. "It's over." I wanted to believe her, but something deep inside told me it wasn't. The fire had destroyed the house, but fires don't erase guilt. They just expose what was buried underneath. Later that afternoon, Brooke arrived at the site. She wore a long gray coat and carried a thick folder in her hands. Her face was pale but determined. "I saw the news," she said, stepping carefully over the debris. "Half the town's talking about it. They're calling it a tragedy, no mention of what really happened." "That's how this town works," I said bitterly. "They pretend the truth never existed." Brooke handed me the folder. "It won't stay buried. The investigators found something under the foundation when the house collapsed. Documents, sealed in metal boxes. Looks like your father hid backups of everything." My heart skipped. "Backups?" She nodded. "Bank records, blackmail letters, transaction receipts. He was smart enough to hide copies underground. The fire didn't touch them." I exhaled slowly. "So even dead, he's still haunting us." Brooke met my eyes. "Maybe it's better this way. If the investigators have everything, it means the full truth can come out without you having to carry it anymore." I didn't know what to say. For years, the truth had been my burden, my purpose, my revenge. Now that it was finally free, I didn't know who I was without it. Bryn stood a few feet away, watching silently as the firefighters loaded charred beams into trucks. She looked smaller somehow, like all the strength she'd borrowed from fear had vanished. I walked over and stood beside her. "They found more files," I said softly. "Everything he hid." She nodded. "Good. Maybe now they'll finally believe us." "They will," I said. "But it won't bring any peace." Her eyes met mine. "Will anything?" I didn't answer. As the investigators continued their work, one of them approached a man in a navy jacket with soot smeared across his cheek. "Miss Cole?" he asked. "Yes?" He held out a small evidence bag. Inside was a half-burned envelope, the edges blackened but the seal intact. "This was found near the basement. It has your name on it." My stomach twisted. I took the bag, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in my father's handwriting. "Marin," it began. "If you're reading this, then the house is gone. I always knew it would end this way. You think I did this for money, for control, but you were never the target. You were the test. The one to see if the next generation could survive what we couldn't. You were right to hate me. But understand this, what I built didn't die with me. There are people out there who will come looking for what you found. And when they do, you'll wish the attic had been the only place you were trapped." The letter ended without a signature. I stared at the words, numb. My fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled. Bryn looked at me nervously. "What does it say?" I folded the letter back into the envelope. "Nothing that matters." But it did matter. Because it confirmed what I had feared from the beginning, my father's darkness hadn't ended with him. It had roots, deep ones, that stretched far beyond our family. When the sun began to set, the investigators packed up for the evening. Brooke drove us back to her apartment, silent most of the way. Bryn sat in the back seat, staring out the window, lost in thought. As we pulled into the driveway, Brooke spoke softly. "You know, you don't have to stay here anymore. You could leave, start fresh somewhere else." "I know," I said. "But the story's not finished." Bryn's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" I turned in my seat to face her. "Dad said people would come looking. That means his files weren't just blackmail, they were leverage. And leverage means power." She shook her head. "Marin, no. We can't keep chasing this. Let it end." But I couldn't. Not after everything. That night, I lay awake on Brooke's couch, the burned key resting on the table beside me. The fire's glow still burned behind my eyelids, replaying in flashes, the attic collapsing, the house falling apart, my father's face disappearing into the flames. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a warning. I turned the key over in my hand once more. It was still warm. And when I flipped it over, I saw 3 tiny letters etched into the metal letters that didn't belong there. A. C. S. That's when I realized my father hadn't just been blackmailing people, he'd been working for someone else. Someone's still out there. I used to think the attic was my punishment, now I know it was my rebirth. Months had passed since the fire consumed the Cole house. The town had moved on, or at least pretended to. Investigators had taken the recovered files, news outlets had printed exposés, and the police were quietly following up on leads that stretched far beyond my father's small circle. Bryn and I had stayed close, but the distance was still there, a fragile thread binding 2 sisters who had both been broken and rebuilt by the same horrors. I had moved to a small coastal town, far from the memories of the house, the attic, and the lies. My apartment was simple whitewashed walls, the faint scent of salt in the air, and sunlight streaming in from a single window. I decorated it with paintings, abstract swirls of color, light and shadow colliding, a reflection of my journey, my anger, and my eventual survival. The key rested on my desk, polished now and almost ceremonious. It wasn't a tool anymore, it was a symbol. The thing that had locked me away, that had haunted me, had now become a relic of strength. I turned it over in my hand, studying the tiny letters etched into the metal. A. C. S. Even in my solitude, I felt the pull of unfinished business. My father's shadow wasn't completely gone. His networks, the people he'd influenced, the secrets he'd kept, they lingered like smoke, subtle but insistent. But I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt determination. Brooke's book, The Attic's Truth, had been published and became a quiet sensation. It told our story with accuracy, showing the corruption, the abuse, and the resilience of 2 sisters who refused to be erased. People reached out to me, some thanking me for telling the story, others asking questions I didn't yet have answers to. I answered few, kept most of the truth close. Bryn had started over too, opening a small interior design studio by the beach. She sent postcards occasionally, pictures of completed projects, simple notes saying she was okay. I never replied, though I read each one with a quiet sense of connection. We had both survived the storm, but our paths were still ours alone. One morning, I visited a local gallery. My painting, The Girl in the Attic, was displayed among others. Visitors stared at it, captivated by the dark lines, the fractured light, the sense of entrapment and emergence. Some whispered to each other, asking if it was based on a real story. I simply smiled and let it speak for itself. I returned home that evening, the key on my desk catching the last rays of sunlight. For the first time, I didn't feel the old weight of the attic pressing on my chest. I could breathe. I could think. I could exist outside the memory that had defined my entire adolescence. That night, I dreamed. Not of the attic, not of the shadow, not of my father. I dreamed of light spilling across walls, of air moving freely, of doors opening and closing at my own will. It was quiet, but it was alive. In the weeks that followed, I began to paint with a new intensity. The colors were sharper, the lines freer. The memories that had once trapped me were now tools, shaping my art into something raw and honest. Each stroke was a reclaiming of power, each canvas a victory over the silence that had once held me prisoner. One evening, I decided to finally leave the key on my shelf. It wasn't a relic of fear anymore, it was a reminder of survival, of cunning, and of the strength I had discovered in myself. I touched it lightly and whispered a thank you to the girl I used to be, the one locked away in that dusty attic, the one who had endured, the one who had survived. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs, steady and unstoppable. The sound reminded me that life moves forward, regardless of the past. Pain shapes you, but it doesn't define you. Choices define you. Courage defines you. I looked at my paintings, my small apartment, the key on its shelf. For the first time in years, I felt complete. The attic was gone, the house was gone, and the ghosts had finally been laid to rest, not in fire, not in ashes, but in the life I was building for myself. I realized I had a choice now to live in fear, to dwell in anger, or to move forward with intention, and I chose to live. One last time I touched the key, feeling the faint warmth in its metal. I smiled. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't trapped. Because when I locked that attic door for the last time, I didn't just close it on them. I closed it on my past. I placed the key carefully in a small box beside my paintings and turned away, stepping into the bright coastal air. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and possibility, and I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this was the first day of my life that truly belonged to me. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. The attic was a memory, a teacher, and now a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power to reclaim one's own story. I walked to the edge of the cliffs, letting the wind whip around me, and for the first time, I felt free. The key wasn't just metal, it was proof that I could survive anything, and that nothing, not even the people who locked me away, could ever hold me prisoner again.